All right, so I think we've got about as many people as were here last week. So I'm going to go ahead and get started since we've got a lot to cover. Um, in case you don't remember, my name is Jake Connor. I am the Walton County Family and Consumer Sciences agent. This is going to be our third class in the Home Maintenance for New Homeowners series. If you have any questions or if we're experiencing any technical difficulties, please drop in the chat. Miss Rhonda will be able to flag me down and let me know so we can get those things sorted out. Additionally, this class will be recorded and sent out to you via a YouTube link. So if you want to go back and review any of this information, you'll be able to access that at any time. I went ahead and dropped um, my email address into the chat as well. So if you'd like to email me at a later time to ask a question, or if there's something you would like to ask outside of this call, please feel free to use that email address. Like I said, this class is being recorded for you to be able to go back and review later. However, there will be a time at the end of class where we will stop the recording. So folks who want to ask a question but don't want it to be recorded will have that opportunity as well. So if you remember with last week's discussion, we went over a home maintenance checklist. Ms. Rhonda said she sent that out to you guys along with the recording from that class. If you have any questions about that, please let me know as well. This lesson will dovetail nicely with that. So in that lesson, there was the words, check or inspect sort of over and over again when talking about various elements involving water. So checking your hot water heater, checking your pipes, checking your main water line, checking to make sure there's no, your downspouts and there's no access for groundwater. This lesson is going to cover a lot of why that's important. So we're going to be talking about mold, moisture, and we'll go over some more in-depth information as well around hot water heater maintenance, and we'll have some additional plumbing information at the end of that as well. So our agenda for the day, we will be talking about mold and moisture control. That will be the bulk of our lesson. We will go over that hot water heater maintenance. We're going to talk about, if you have issues with plumbing, if you when you're doing that home maintenance checklist and you discover that there's an issue, what do I need to know before I start contacting a plumbing company? What is some information that's going to help me maximize my value for dollar and protect my home? And then we'll go over a few plumbing basics after that as well. And then we'll have space for questions at the end. All right, so this is a presentation put together from our specialists at the university in conjunction with the USDA around controlling mold and moisture inside the home. Most people spend the majority of their time indoors, and of the places they spend indoors, the home is, of course, the most commonly frequented places. One of the most common indoor air pollutants is mold. So, of course, we want to make sure that we take care of that as well. And we want to take as many steps as we can to minimize that type of pollution. And so there are many resources to help, for example, us here at the Extension office. So the overview for the mold section, we'll go over understanding moisture and mold. We'll talk about preventing mold growth. How do you deal with mold if it does pop up? And then we'll have a short summary of the mold that we cover. So I guess I should have given this out at the top, but a bit of a trigger warning. There's going to be a lot of really gross pictures in a presentation about mold. So if that is an issue for you, then just be warned that it's coming up. All right, so mold is a form classified as a fungi. So they're similar to mushrooms or yeast. It's important to remember that molds are an essential part of our ecosystem. Unlike mosquitoes, which seem to have no benefit, mold is important for breaking things down, what we would call nature's recycling bin, right? They are everywhere. They are even in the healthiest air that you breathe. If you go outside, if you've ever been anywhere, you've encountered mold of some kind. They release these teeny tiny little spores, and which is how they spread, and that is also how they can damage our lungs. Mold only becomes a problem when it starts to colonize, especially places we don't want it to colonize, and when it colonizes in very large areas. It may be on walls, ceiling tiles, books, in the back of a closet, floorboards, and even in carpet. So there are two things that mold needs. Mold needs moisture and it needs organic matter. So that organic matter is going to be wood, paper, carpet, insulation, drywall, very loose definition of organic here. We're not talking about, leaving meat on the counter. Literally any surface is something that mold could potentially grow on. That would serve as both its source of food, so it's going to be sort of slowly eating away at it, and as its shelter, something for it to cling on to and continue to colonize. Of these two things, the only thing we can control is moisture, right? We're not going to live in a steel cage to protect ourselves from this. So the only thing that we have the power over is that moisture. Mold tends to be what we call a fuzzy science. Haha, funny joke. It's important to remember that there is no sort of clear dose level where it becomes harmful. It's similar to something like radon or lead, where sort of any exposure may be harmful to someone. I may not be affected, but a different person in this class may be severely affected by the same exposure level. So it's important to keep things like that in mind, especially if you are not the only person in your home. If you have children, if you have a spouse, if you have others that frequently stay with you, they may be very differently affected than you are. It's affected by all kinds of things. So the amount of mold, obviously significantly more, could cause more issues. We talked about the sensitivity of the individual, things like asthma, allergies, and other respiratory problems. If someone uses a lot of tobacco products, they would be at a larger risk. Of course, children and the elderly tend to be very often affected by these issues. And then the type of mold and toxin, and we'll get into that a little bit more down the line. So the sort of very most common reaction to mold is sort of an allergic reaction. If we probably have friends or family who are very sensitive to it, if they're in a musty place, they sort of can't breathe really easily. They may be symptoms similar to what we would call hay fever, so sneezing, runny nose, red eyes, or sore throat. They can trigger asthma attacks, and individuals who have that as an issue. And then a situation called hypersensitivity pneumosis. I'm probably going to pronounce some words wrong in this presentation. That's what the PowerPoint's for, so you can read some of these more difficult language as well. And then in rare cases, you may experience an infectious disease that occurred from bat and bird droppings. So if you have those specific problems, understand that creates even more challenges. So on the previous slide, those are sort of hard and fast. We are very sure that these are health effects of mold. What we have on this slide is things that we are pretty sure are health effects. So fatigue or flu-like symptoms, nausea, respiratory issues, in the eyes and skin, certain neurological issues and immune suppression. We're pretty sure, but we aren't certain. That cause and effect has not been absolutely identified with mold. So these are sort of listed in the maybe category. All right, so I promised a conversation on specific types of mold. So you may hear the term toxic mold used. That's not necessarily the correct way of speaking when we're talking about the mold inside your home. Some molds produce toxins, which is true, but sort of toxic implies that you are eating it, which in the case of, mold as a foodborne illness is true, but that's not exactly what we're talking about here. It may be better a more accurate term is to describe it as a toxogen. Probably the most common type of mold you've heard of, something called black mold, because it looks black, is not necessarily the best way of talking about it. The dangerous thing people are often talking about, as you can see listed on the slide there, Stachybotrys chartium. I told you I'm not the best at pronouncing things. This is suspected to cause very serious issues in individuals, very difficult health effects, but those aren't clearly established, but they are very strongly suspected. This is a very slimy mold that only grows on cellulose, so any type of wood or paper product. And this only grows in areas that have been wet for a very long time. So think about typically areas affected by flooding. So our friends over in North Carolina dealing with the effects of Helene as they go through their cleanup. This will be a big concern for them if you have areas that are sort of constantly wet, like a basement with rising groundwater. This may be a very big concern. maybe not necessarily for the average home. An important distinction we want to draw is the difference between mold and mildew. So this is sort of a hot tub jacuzzi situation where mildew is considered a type of mold, but not all molds are considered a type of mildew. So mildew is a mold with what is known as a flat growth habit, so sort of slowly growing. Mildew is what we generally call something that would grow on shower curtains or clothing, thinking it may be harmless. It also appears a lot on window seals that are not properly sealed. So remember, in our previous presentation, we talked a lot about weather stripping. We talked a lot about caulk. We talked about inspecting these potential ingress areas. Well, mildew, a form of mold growth, is one of the reasons why it's important to carry out those frequent inspections. The important thing to remember is that these are caused where moisture is high. So remember that shower curtain, it's in the bathroom, it's getting wet every day. That area next to the window seal, the wind is bringing water into the home through water vapor. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So those are both areas that are being wet very frequently. The important thing is that this should be cleaned up very quickly. You may not consider mildew to be particularly nasty, but it is a type of mold. It is contributing to it is damaging whatever it is growing on, and it is releasing those mold toxins. It is decreasing the air quality of your home. So make sure you're any type of mold, even if you may not think it is important, to get it cleaned up as quickly as possible. All right, so we're trying to prevent some mold growth, right? All right, this is a lot of information, so buckle up. Mold damage, it's important to remember mold damages whatever it's growing on. So acting important to clean it up is always very important. If you start to experience a mold problem, then the likely cause of it is excess moisture. So trying to figure out what's causing that excess moisture is really important. You can use a device known as a hygrometer. Another word for that would be a device that measures the humidity, the relative humidity of the space that you're in order to identify that. If the humidity is 60% or higher, then your home is a potential area where mold could be growing more easily. Always look for water leaks around pipes or any type of standing water near the foundation of your home. Those are ways that water can collect and create possible mold and mildew. Another contributing factor may be poor cleaning, so always discourage mold growth by trying to keep bathrooms and other areas that are wet frequently as clean as possible. You may need to disinfect the shower after every use. Always try and keep things dry. Remember, moisture is the enemy. Keeping things dry is going to help us in our battle. The four main sources of water to control, you have plumbing leaks, construction moisture, condensation from surfaces, so things that are chilled, like your HVAC system, and then poorly managed rainwater or groundwater. And we'll have an excellent slide explaining that in more detail a little bit here. Oh, I just can't see that. All right, there we go. All right. So, mold and moisture control. So like I said, you want to make sure you're keeping that at least under 70. You want to aim for under 60. Some material may get wet. For example, you're gonna cook in your kitchen, or you're gonna have to clean your countertops. There's going to be moisture that happens. That's not the end of the world. You want to remember that you want to get things dry. If things are wet, you want to get them dry within 2 days. So that is sort of a sometimes you might want to think about 48 hours. If you discover a roof leak, you have 48 hours to kind of get it patched up and get it dried out. Those are sort of a key thing to remember with this. Sometimes some buildings will sort of trap moisture more or be slow to dry, and those are going to be extra vulnerable to mold growth. And we'll talk about some strategies that may be necessary for maximizing that as well. All right, so remember that goal we want to have between 40 and 60, what we would call the optimum zone. You can see some of the examples of why that is here. So if you had it too low, bacteria and viruses could grow. If you have it too high, then the fungi and the dust mites can grow. Even if you don't have condensation problems, relative humidity is still important for your health. This table is a great example of why that optimal zone is created. So it's important to remember that the relative humidity is how much water vapor is in the air. So if you see, if you have a relative humidity of 50%, that means that the water is holding about 50% of the total water it could theoretically hold. With some more disgusting slides, remember we want to keep for mold, we want to keep it underneath 70. However, if you or an individual in your family is allergic to dust mites, a not uncommon allergy that many people unfortunately have to suffer with, you want to keep it underneath 50%. So keeping it underneath 50% doesn't kill dust mites. However, they are unable to reproduce at that level, and so they will sort of slowly die off if you are able to keep it under 50%. And that's going to be a really big challenge for folks. Maybe our friends out in Arizona living in the desert, that's relatively easy for them. But for us, 50 is not, there's a lot of days in the year where the weather sort of naturally is above 50%. So it's going to be a little bit of work if you have to keep it under that. However, keeping it under 70% is generally going to be relatively simple, unless you have a very moist environment. And some more wonderful pictures of some more wonderful mold. Where we talk about, in the bottom picture, we talk about insulation, not just saving you money on your electric bill by, keeping the cool air in or the warm air in. Also protecting your investment in your home by keeping that cold air rushing in can bring moisture. And like we said, whenever there's moisture, mold can grow. So making sure your home is adequately insulated. If any damage occurs to your home, making sure that the insulation is replaced can help prevent this from happening in the future. And this can happen on walls or window seals. So those are both examples listed on the slide. Mold can also come in, sort of out of sight places. This is a picture of a toilet tank. So, not the first place you think to clean when you're looking in your bathroom. However, the condensation is forming. It's being fed by the organic material that goes in the toilet. So, in this case, the porcelain that the mold is on is not actually feeding it. However, it is still able to be sustained because of the environment that it's in. If you're having this issue, you may need to be sort of leaving your exhaust fan on, or maybe insulating this part of your home to keep it from developing condensation. But it's also a great example where you may not think to check this area of your home. So think about where those kinds of places may develop condensation over time. All right. So if you've identified a humidity issue, or just as a way to sort of keep your home from developing that issue, what are some ways you can reduce your humidity? Number one is run your exhaust fan. So increasing your ventilation. Anytime there's a lot of moisture, anytime it's in use, the kitchen, the bathroom, the laundry, make sure you are running those exhaust fans to get that moisture outside your home. Make sure that those ducts properly connect to the outside so that you are getting the most out of those exhaust fans. Remember last week we talked about the toilet paper test. So tear off 2 pieces of toilet paper and hold it up sort of next to that exhaust fan. If you're holding it, it should be able to, the exhaust should be, the ventilation fan should be strong enough to suck that toilet paper flush with the fan. If it's not, it may just be blocked with dust and need a sort of a light cleaning. If it still doesn't, then it may be time to replace that piece of equipment. If that is not enough, you may need, if you're still suffering from moisture issues while running those things and that they are working properly, you may need to shorten or reduce your moisture producing activities. So for a great example of that is it takes a lot of water to wash your laundry, for example. So rather than running small loads, you may run fewer larger loads. So to reduce the total amount of water being brought into your home, therefore reducing the amount of moisture as well. Taking shorter showers would be another example of reducing those moisture producing activities. If you're experiencing a dry day, it may also be a great idea to sort of open a window and let some of that moisture out of the home naturally as well. Boiling water on the stove for a long time can also release a ton of moisture into the home as well. So reducing your cooking time, sort of large pots of water, may be necessary. This one is a sort of an interesting one. It's not something I had thought of before preparing for this lesson, but if you have to replace an air conditioner or you're purchasing one for some reason, don't buy one that's too big. Bigger isn't better because that air conditioner, they're measured in sort of tons. So if it is able to fill up your home very quickly and then shut off, then it is not going to be actively drying your home. So sort of if you understand the mechanism of how air conditioners work, or if you've ever looked under your car and seen that little drip, drip, drop, you understand that they create a lot of condensation in what they do. So they're actively pulling moisture out of whatever they're cooling. But they're not going to run if it's too big of a system and it gets your home cooled very quickly. So having an AC system at the correct size will keep your home will reduce the moisture content of your home. Of course, sealing any air leaks, making sure you're performing those inspections that we talked about, adding that weather stripping if necessary, making sure that the caulk isn't broken or peeling, and taking care of your home in that way is always going to help. And then it may be also necessary to increase ventilation in other ways. So maybe for example, at my home, our crawl space had to be encapsulated and a dehumidifier installed, so a ventilation system. You may have to have other inlet vents or ridge vents in your roof to release warm air if you're still experiencing these types of humidity problems. So some of the tools potentially necessary, not everyone is going to need these, but there's something interesting to learn. So you'll have a moisture meter, which measures the moisture content of something, the exact material. So you can see the individual on the slide, holding it up to a wall and seeing what the exact moisture level of that wall is. You have the humidity meter or the hygrometer. I'm sorry, I'm terrible at pronouncing. That object in the middle is sort of telling you what the relative humidity of the environment it is placed in. And then you may have a humidistat installed by your HVAC technician, which will sort of allow your air conditioning unit to function as a dehumidifier, sort of it turning on anytime a humidity level is reached, in addition to if a temperature level is required. All right, so those are the tools to measure humidity. What about actually changing the humidity? So you'll never guess that a dehumidifier reduces the humidity of an environment. Wow. So dehumidifiers are very helpful devices at managing humidity. They are they're different than air conditioners. Air conditioners change the temperature. It makes it a lot cooler. These dehumidifiers may actually kick out heat air as high as 90 degrees. So they're not designed to be heaters, but they may have a slight effect in that direction. Their only job is to remove moisture from the air. If you're in the market for purchasing a dehumidifier, it is important to make sure that your dehumidifier uses a low amount of energy. So look for like an Energy Star or a similar energy efficiency rating. You want to make sure that it operates quietly. Oftentimes these can be very noisy contraptions. They have compressors and fans and stuff. So if you're constantly turning it off because it's bothering you, then it's not going to be able to complete its core function. You want to purchase a dehumidifier that uses a direct drain or condensate pump. If it uses a tank instead, then you'll have to be emptying that tank several times a day. And if you forget to empty your tank, then your dehumidifier is not working, and your moisture level is going to rise. Additionally, you want to make sure that it has a freeze protection so that if it's in a cool place like a basement or crawl space, then it's not going to freeze up and lose your investment and potentially damage your larger investment that is your home. Additional ways to control moisture would be making sure your vented appliances that produce moisture are properly vented. Clothes dryers, stoves, kerosene heaters are some examples. Stoves and kerosene heaters produce water vapor when they burn, and so they can increase add a lot of humidity to your home unless they're properly vented to the outside. All right, so here's that wonderful chart I promised to sort of remind you of some of the ways water may enter your home. So, you may have runoff run into your home. We want to make sure that we have protecting our home with our properly and angled downspouts. You may have groundwater that sort of seeps in sort of up through the home or in the form of water vapor. So, having a basement or crawl space inspections to make sure that's not happening is always important. We've all either had a roof leak or had a friend who has a roof leak. And then, of course, other forms of water vapor like cooking, bathing, watering plants, etc. It's important to remember water will enter at some point. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when these things happen. The important thing is to find it quickly and get it dried out within 48 hours. Remember those 2 days, you've got 2 days to sort of remedy the issue. All right, so we want to keep out liquid water, trace and repair any type of rain leaks in your roof. You want to make sure that they are using the correct material. So if it was the flashing that came loose, for example, around a chimney or something, make sure you're properly repairing with the correct flashing. And you want to also do the same thing with groundwater leaks as well. So in that basement or crawl space area, this may be the result of, for example, failed drainage. So you may just needed to clean out a nearby ditch that is designed to carry water away from your home so that it's no longer coming to your home. You always want to manage outdoor air as a source of water vapor. Outdoor air is hot and humid and can decrease your home. If you have masonry that is reflecting a sunny surface, so a brick piece or a stone area of your home, like the foundation or exposed piece, that directs is pointed towards the sun, that the drastic temperature change of the sun coming up and heating it up and going down and cooling it down can allow moisture to sort of soak through that. So like we said, performing those regular home inspections are especially important, and thinking about those kinds of things when performing them is always important. If you have indoor chilled surfaces, things that come in contact with the earth, chilled water lines, make sure they are insulated, use low permeable materials, and keep them away from unconditioned air, which may allow them to sweat. I think this is a great picture. So as you can see on the smaller bottom picture, this is the same home. In that smaller picture, you can see that it looked totally fine, but it had a sort of a musty smell, a moldy smell that we're probably all familiar with, but you can't see anything wrong with it. However, when they tear down all the furnishings, all the finishings, you can see there's clearly a lot of mold that was growing underneath that. So it's one of those things. It's important to trust your instincts. There may be something hiding underneath that you have to sort of dig a little deeper to find. Leaks happen. They, one of those things that's a fact of life. Things that are built by humans will fall apart. You always want to try and remember to make them as easy to see as possible. Try and make sure they're easy to repair. Don't let them, if at all possible, try and avoid them getting wet. Inspect around things like toilets, tubs, showers, looking under sinks, clothes washers, and dishwashers. Anywhere that water is flowing, bathroom, kitchen, laundry room is sort of the most likely places for leaks to occur. So going through that checklist we went over to make sure that those things aren't leaking or haven't developed a leak is very important. A drain basket is a possible and drain traps or locations for leaks. So making sure that those aren't leaking is always important. Drain pans, you can see this hot water heater has been placed inside of a metal pan. So if it does leak, you can walk by and easily see, oh, there's water underneath my hot water heater. It's not supposed to be there. Or, oh, there's water under my washing machine. It's not supposed to be there, rather than it sort of subtly hiding underneath the machine itself. Can save you a lot of money, protect your flooring, and protect your family from being exposed to that unnecessary mold. All right, the fun part. So if you weren't paying attention, or perhaps a family or friend calls and asks you, what do I do with this mold that has come in my home? We're going to give you the tools you need to sort of handle that difficult situation as well. All right, You will probably smell mold before you can see it. You always want to think about that musty smell we talked about earlier. Um, if you smell that, it's time to start looking. It's time to put on your detective cap. You want to first thing you want to do is to try and detect where the mold is coming from. Is it in the basement? Is it in the attic? Is it in the kitchen? Sort of walking around and trying to identify where that smell is. Um, the first place is to check bathroom, kitchen, laundry room, basement, or crawl space. Like I said, those are things that are going to be most in contact with either water or pipes or plumbing. And so those are going to be the most important places to check first. A question that comes up a lot when talking about this is, should I be testing for mold? The answer is no. So even though if you smell that musty smell, you want to dilly dally, right? You want to get straight to the mitigation step. Test if you smell it, you want to start trying to find it. You want to try and isolate where that smell is coming from. We'll talk about how to eliminate mold in a moment, but you don't want to sort of waste time testing for it. The exception to the rule is one, if a doctor has ordered you to test. So maybe if you're experiencing you're under medical supervision, they're trying to identify what problems you're having. They may have you test for mold. Number two is if you've already done mitigation, it may be necessary for the company that you've hired to ensure that they've done a good job. They may want you to test as well. Those are sort of the two indications where you would want to test instead. Routine testing, so sort of, I don't smell anything, but I'm curious if I have mold, is not recommended by the CDC or the EPA. And the reasons you might not want to test is it can be very costly and it's often unnecessary. You can just save time by skipping straight to the cleaning. And it's also, those test results are not going to tell you where the moisture is coming from. So congratulations, you know the exact species of the mold. That doesn't tell you how to kill it. That doesn't tell you where it's coming from. So you just need to move on to those steps anyway. Oftentimes you'll find offer either online or in stores sort of home mold test kits. Those are those have not been proven to be reliable. And so if you do need to do some testing, we would encourage you to contact a reliable lab. There's no certification or license required for mold testing. So it's important that you shop carefully when considering your options there. All right, so if you need to clean up some mold, if it is the area is approximately 10 square feet or less, you should be, as a smart and responsible homeowner, you should be able to get that taken care of by yourself. However, it is more than 10 feet, I would encourage you to consider seeking professional assistance. Additionally, if that HVAC system has been contaminated by mold, in the ducts or in the unit itself, you may also need to consider professional supervision coordination as well. If you have identified mold or you're smelling a musky smell, the very first thing I would encourage you to do is to turn off your HVAC system. What you could do is if you find that, oh no, I've, under my kitchen sink leaked and, there's mold growing in my cabinet. If you sort of run that HVAC system, you could be spreading those spores out throughout your entire home. So that is both a danger to your family and potentially risking your asset in the form of your very expensive home. Another question that comes up frequently is should you have your air ducts cleaned? You should only consider cleaning your air ducts if there's a lot of very visible mold, they are infested with insects or rodents, or if they have been clogged with dust. So this is not something that requires regular cleaning or maintenance, as we've talked about with many other things. However, if they have, if it's not able to perform its duty, then they may need to be cleaned. If you are cleaning yourself, you want to try and minimize exposure to mold, direct contact, and invisible spores that you could breathe in. We would encourage you to use some PPE or personal protective equipment. An N95, like this individual is wearing, you see the metal tab on her nose. You would want to squeeze that to make sure that the dust spores, the spores cannot get in through the top there. The higher number means it's more effective. So a simple dust mask is not going to be effective enough. You need to purchase an N95 or a KN95 as well. Those would offer equivalent levels of protection. If you have a professional dealing with a larger mold problem, they may use more robust cleaning equipment. So you can see the gentleman on the right has, head to toe, like a hazmat suit type situation with, gloves and a plastic suit and everything. So they're sort of ready to go to protect them completely if they're dealing with that sort of larger situation. A common issue is if you were trying to clean a home that was built before 1978, there often are exposed, that were often constructed using lead-based paint. Um, Lead-based paint is obviously harmful to everyone, but especially to children as it contains lead. You always want to assume anytime you're working in a home that was built before 1978, you just assume that it has lead paint unless it has been tested to ensure that it doesn't. And remember that any type of mold cleanup process may disturb that paint. I would encourage you to sort of either contact us or the EPA to get some additional information if you're sort of worried about that situation. But you always want to avoid creating any dust or spreading any dust that already exists in that specific situation. So our steps to mold cleanup, you want to isolate and ventilate your area, seal off. Like I said, make sure the HVAC isn't running, close all the doors, try and isolate it to one specific area, encapsulate it, covering it with plastic, throw away any items that have been, you seal them up, throw them away so that they can't infect anything else. You want to clean using a non-phosphate detergent. If a cleaner with phosphate is used and any of the detergent is left behind, that can act as food for the mold. So then you've just given it more food. It's just going to come back even stronger. So clean and then sanitize, and then remember, dry it out as fast as you can. Less than 2 days. In general, you want to try and cover the floor, furniture, bag it up, use wet wipes or HEPA filter vacuums to reduce any kind of paint dust that may be created. All right, so disinfectants are generally not necessary unless you're dealing with a flood situation. Some individuals may choose to disinfect anyway, but that is sort of personal preference. Bleach is commonly used as a cheap and a useful killer because it kill mold if it's in contact with it long enough. However, it is not a perfect cure-all. Bleach doesn't have any kind of residual effect so that it doesn't sort of stick around and keep killing over time. It can also, surfaces will tend to stay wet if bleach is used. So obviously that's the opposite of what we want to do when we're trying to dry out those surfaces afterwards. Bleach is hazardous. Its fumes can be very dangerous, especially folks who have breathing problems. You never want to use it on wood, fine woods, metals, or anything that may damage. And if it just kills the mold, then oftentimes dead mold spores can be just as dangerous as live mold spores. So simply using a disinfectant isn't sufficient. You want to actually clean the surface and remove the mold so that it can, dead or alive, it's no longer causing damage to your family. If you choose to use bleach or another disinfectant, always ventilate the area. Never mix chlorine bleach with other cleaning products or detergents that contain ammonia or an acid, as that will create toxic fumes. Make sure you're following the manufacturer's instructions on the label, and never use bleach on metals or in your air conditioning system. If you're hiring a professional, I would encourage you to seek out advice from certified professionals from one of their associations, so like the Restoration Industry Association or the Institution of Inspection or Indoor Air Quality Associations. The APA also has some excellent information on mold removal as well. All right, so it's important to stay on mold alert. You want to try and shoot for that low indoor air humidity between 40 and 60%. Inspect, inspect, inspect. Follow the checklist that we passed out last week. Add extra things onto it that pertain specifically to your home. So if you notice you may have a problem area that you need to inspect more frequently or something that we left off, please feel free to add to that with additional specific things necessary for your home. Anytime you have a musty odor, that means you have an active colony. So it's time to it's time to clean. And then if you find a lot of regrowth, it may be in time to invest in professional help with specialized equipment. All right, so important as a review, the mold growth is caused by moisture. So mold control is moisture control. Excessive moisture can be prevented as long as you're doing all the maintenance, quickly repairing leaks, and having proper ventilation in those areas of your home. And then we have more resources available. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. I'll be happy to pass out those materials. All right, we still have a little bit of time, so I guess we get to go over some more plumbing information while I've got you guys here. So we're going to go over our hot water heater maintenance first. So we want to do our clean our hot water heaters once per year. However, if you're in an older home with a unit that is 10 years old or older, or is already showing signs of distress, you may want to skip your annual cleanings. Overall, this cleaning it annually will increase the lifespan of your appliance. However, it does add some stress to the unit. So if it is already sort of getting to the point where it's a little bit worn, it can cause premature failure. So those first 10 years, by all means, clean it every single year, but at that point, it may not be necessary any longer. So in order to clean your hot water heater, the only thing you have to have is a garden hose and lots of time. However, a colander may be necessary if you're having sediment come out, you may want to know exactly what was inside the hot water heater. You may not want that sort of getting all nasty and gumming up your yard. This process does take a few hours, so making sure you have plenty of time when you get started is important. All right, so our first step is going to be to drain the tank. You want to, before draining the tank, you want to make sure you're cutting off the hot water heater. So if it's electric, that will simply be disabling the breaker. If you have a gas hot water heater, you want to follow the manufacturer's instructions for this stage of the process. After it has been disabled, you want to turn off the water supply. If you don't turn off that water supply, it will sort of immediately refill when we're trying to drain the hot water heater. The manufacturer's guidelines will show you where the water supply valve, usually located around the top of the tank, as you can see in our diagram on the slide. Move on to draining the tank. You'll have to attach your garden hose to the drain port located on the bottom. It may require a screwdriver to turn on, or an adapter to go sort of from the port on the hot water heater to your specific garden hose. And then you're going to run the opposite end of that hose somewhere far away from your home. Make sure it's going in towards the ditch, make sure it's going downhill. You don't want that water to sort of leak under the foundation or get under the house, or find its way into your crawl space. So make sure that hose is pointed in the right direction. Once the garden hose is in place and properly secured, you can turn on that drain port. It may just simply be something that you twist with your hand like a garden hose. It may require a screwdriver, as the individual is demonstrating on the slide. You'll know the tank is empty when the water stops flowing out of it. After we've drained the tank, we can go ahead and flush the tank. So we will slowly turn, you'll know it's finished draining because there's no sediment, there's no water coming out the bottom. Or when it's time to flush the tank, you'll slowly turn on that water that we talked about earlier, doing basically the opposite of what you did earlier. And you'll know you're finished flushing when the water comes out clear. So when there's no sediment coming out of the water heater anymore, then you'll know it is safe to move on from flushing the tank. Make sure you don't disconnect that hose until the water runs clear. Once it starts running clear, you can sort of slowly turn that valve at the bottom off. And once the water sort of stops flowing, you can disconnect the hose. Be careful, the hose is still going to be full of water. So you sort of need to carefully take it outside and drain the hose, and probably mop up all the water that you dribbled on the way outside. After we flushed our tank, it's time to refill the tank. So once the tank will sort of begin refilling, as soon as you've turned that hose off, you want to go to either your kitchen sink or bathroom sink and turn on the hot water side. Remember, we're draining our hot water heater, so we need to turn the hot side of our sink on and let that run for about at least about 15 minutes. After it's been running for about 15 minutes, you can go ahead and flip the breaker back on, follow the manufacturer's instructions for those gas hot water heaters. Potentially, you may have to relight a pilot light, and you should have finished flushing your hot water heater at this time. So you want to let it run for a few more minutes and then go back and check, make sure that water is now is working properly and heating the water inside of it. As a quick reminder, our home maintenance checklist that we passed out, always want to be inspecting attics and pipes for any signs of leaks, crawl spaces and basements or other potential points of ingress, windows, all important things. Make sure you're following your home maintenance guides. It's never a problem to think about consulting a professional if you have questions. If you've never owned a home before, you may need to contact a contractor. You may need to contact a plumber. It's what they do. They would much rather come to you and answer your questions about, plumbing or roofs, than rather replace a whole one just when something could have just been a simple repair. If you're in a situation where you need to hire a plumber, we would encourage you to follow these simple steps. Like other types of contractors, plumbers must be licensed and insured by the state of Georgia. They have to provide that information to you. So always ask and make sure that they have both of those things. If they don't have those things, then they aren't allowed to operate as a plumber. We would encourage folks to check online reviews for services and make sure they offer something similar to what you need. With online reviews, it's important that, you're going to get a few loud voices, a few vengeful folks who maybe weren't happy with the price or this or that. That may have been completely outside the plumber's hands, so you may need to take those reviews with a grain of salt. Feel free to ask for friends and family if they have a good relationship with a local plumber who may help you out. Always ask questions. This is somebody that you're going to potentially be paying a lot of money. Who this is their job. This is their whole life. If they're good at their job, they'll be more than happy to answer your questions in a way that you understand, and that can be a way for you to understand a little bit more about your home and protect your asset. Before selecting a plumber, always try and get multiple opinions or estimates if they are available for free. Always get any estimate in writing so you can compare that to any final bill that you get. And then always check your estimate, double check your estimate against the final bill and understand why any discrepancies may exist. They may have had to do a little bit more maintenance or a part may have cost a little bit more than they expected. But if they're a good plumber, if they're good at their job, then they'll make that information clear to you. Don't pour grease down any drain. If you have a septic system, it will cause it to stop working significantly sooner. If you live have access to city water, then it can gum up their system and cause a lot of damage, potentially up to and including sewage backing up into your home. So in order to dispose of solid grease, you can just throw it straight into a trash can. If you have liquid grease, there are products like Solidify that we show on the screen. That's not necessary. It may be helpful for some folks. If you need to dispose of liquid grease, you can always put it into a disposable container that you're going to throw away, like a mayonnaise jar or a peanut butter jar, seal it, and then throw away. I decided to include this slide on plunging toilets because I thought this might be something where everyone kind of knows how to do it. But if you asked me to tell someone how to do it or someone called me and desperately needed to know, I don't know if I could have explained it to them as very succinctly. So I thought, maybe you're in a situation where you're off at work and your kid calls you, says, "Oh, Mom, how do I plunge a toilet?" You can be equipped with some easy steps for how to inform them in as few words as possible. So first, Make sure there's at least enough standing water in the bowl. You may need to use a cup or pot or bowl to add additional water so that you can plunge it properly. You want to angle the plunger over the hole. Some of them will have sort of little plastic protrusions or flanges. You want to make sure those get down into the hole. Then you want to work it down and back up. Often you'll hear a gurgling sound as air is sort of forced down and allowed back out. Once it's sufficiently been plunged several times, then you can flush. It may be recommended to go ahead and flush a second time to sort of ensure that that process of flushing is working properly again. All right, we are quickly approaching the end of our time together, but I did want to take some time to go over some all-natural drain cleaners. We all are going to face clogged drains in our lives, unfortunately. Drain cleaners are very common chemicals. However, they are single-use. They can be quite expensive, and it's important for them that they be stored safely. By using these all-natural methods, you won't have to worry about another dangerous chemical inside your home, and you may be able to save money and time using stuff that you already have on hand. So we can use our physical methods. So you may need to snake the drain. The UGA doesn't endorse any products, but this is an example of an item they may use to snake a drain, sort of remove or dislodge some physical items. You can sort of use that same thing over and over again. Particularly if you have a sink or a shower, maybe you have many girls in your home or pets with a lot of hair, you may need to sort of use a screwdriver to undo the bottom drain. It's going to be really nasty to get in there and get all that hair out, but it's important to remember that hair is very resilient. It would take several bottles of drain cleaning solution to get it out. So it may be significantly easier, faster, and cheaper to just reach your hand in there and get it out, even if it may be quite disgusting. As for our all-natural chemical cleaners, you can use a mixture of baking soda and vinegar. You want to use equal portions or about half a cup of each. Before you get started with this, you want to make sure that you have some way to mark a sink that it is sort of being cleaned. So, so a piece of tape over the sink, maybe you want to have right upside down, put a glass upside down on top of it and leave a note so that while it is sitting for that hour, no one comes along and messes up your hard work. And then you want to be able to pour boiling water over the top of that drain in order to sort of flush it out. So if we all probably had the middle school science experiment, the baking soda volcano, you're making a similar reaction. All the air created from that acid and base can help to dislodge those clogs in our drains. A substitute for vinegar would be lemon juice. Those are both acids. The lemon juice is going to smell a lot better than vinegar. However, vinegar is significantly cheaper, so it's up to you to decide which one you prefer to use. They have about equal effectiveness. Maybe you have a very stubborn drain. It's going to need to be cleaned twice anyway. So you may choose to do the vinegar first because it's cheaper, and then follow it up with the lemon juice to get that fresher smell. All right. Our other final all-natural cleaner is baking soda and salt. So again, equal portions, half cup salt, half cup baking soda, mixing those two solids together, pouring them down the drain. You can leave those for as short as 30 minutes or up to overnight if it's a really tough clog, and then pour some boiling water in afterwards. All right, so that is the end of my presentation. There is my contact information on screen if you'd like to write down my email address or a phone number to call and contact with any questions. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions now. If there are no questions, then I will end the recording and I can answer any questions that folks may not want to ask on the recording. So if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to unmute and ask those questions now. All right, if no one has any questions, I'll go ahead and end the recording so that folks may choose to